Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like Diamonds, got two special guests here. Introduce yourself, please, to the audience.
I guess I'll go first. I am Luke Simons, like Diamonds. Of Joe, I'll beat Joe to it. He's about to yell it out. So
Beard's starting to come back, dude. Can we expect a mullet in the near future? Tony's smiling. We all know how
it's
amazing
actually
that
getting
mullet.
kind of close. It's getting close to it. So probably.
All right. That was probably, I think, as your brother, one of the highlights of my life is seeing you come in the office with that mullet. I think how long did you go without a haircut? It was over a year, right?
Yeah, that was getting close to 2 years. To be honest.
Years.
That was a record.
Here it comes, Paul Bunyan, everyone. All right, who else do we have?
Tony Acevedo.
Like
avocado.
Avocado. There it is, like avocado. Guys, we got the crew back by popular demand. We've done quite a few of these in the past. Everyone always seems to love them. And one question we've had a lot recently, especially here in the winter time where it's been some funky weather. And like last month, January was like, especially here in Florida, it was like one of the windiest months I can remember in the history of Florida. Like it was nuts. It seemed like every day seemed to be just crazy wind. And that seemed to be true in Texas and Carolinas, et cetera. So a great place, is hitting some residential canals and docks. And so we got Tony. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of fishing docks in a kayak and also covering, more of the East Coast. And then Lukey here to talk a little bit more about the Gulf and using his boat to fish docks. We're going to talk about the best type of docks, what to look for, best times to fish them, best lures to use for docks for catching redfish and speckled trout, and might even do some sheepshead stuff as a little bonus. And what else? Talk about the mistakes. I think that's probably going to be the most valuable thing in this, is talking about the common mistakes that most people make, including me, when we go look back at some of the footage about just not being stealthy. And then positioning and approach. We're actually going to get on online maps and show some real docks that we fished and talk about how to fish them. It's easy to say, hey, yeah, go fish a dock, and here's what lure to use. It's a little bit tougher to actually see, how to do it and visualize, all right, I need to approach it from this direction based on the tides or the wind, and I need to actually be this far away from it. The little things like that make a massive difference. So, Luke, Tony, who wants to kind of kick it off? Yeah.
I'll go ahead and start for the overall premise. And, I lived on the Atlantic coast for a while, and the same type of docks are relevant. It doesn't matter what coast you're on or even what region you're in. And dock fishing is something that it works all year long, which is great. My personal favorite time to target docks is during the wintertime, though. Which is when we're recording this podcast. For all of the Insider Club members, you've basically seen docks in every week's smart fishing game plan, because it's really been effective lately. And in many cases, the worse the weather is, the better docks are to actually target. But I fish from my paddleboard a lot during the wintertime, and I do not like fishing docks on the paddleboard. I prefer on the boat, because when you do hook in a big fish, it's just really hard to get them out from a kayak or a paddleboard, like from a paddle vessel. So that's just one thing to be mindful of. I know we have a lot of kayakers who listen to these videos, or at least watch these videos or listen to these podcasts. And this can be tough when fishing from a paddle vessel, because when you hook up, you have like 5 seconds to get the fish out. And if that fish is pulling you into the structure, it's really hard to get them out. And with a boat, you have a big advantage, because the fish can't pull you out. So that would be.
However, if you have the fancy pedal drive, that can make up for some of it.
Correct. Yeah, I recently got a pedal drive kayak, and that is actually really effective. That was a game changer for dock fishing, is having the pedal drive, and it was a pedal drive that can go in reverse. So that way you can position yourself looking at the dock, or at least in that vicinity, to make some more accurate casts. And then as soon as you hook up, just like hit it in reverse and go as fast as you possibly can away. Because again, if you get like a smaller trout or flounder, will kind of come out no problem. But when you hook into a nice redfish or especially a snook, I mean, their instinct is to go right back to cover, and that's going to pull you right into the nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Go for it, Tony.
I was going to say, if you have a Hobie pedal kayak that has the reverse, the 180 drive, make sure before you make your cast, make sure you put that drive in reverse. I actually made a mistake. Hooked into a fish, was fighting them, sat down in the seat, went to push the pedals, thought they were in reverse. They were not. I went right into the dock. So make sure you're in gear before you start fishing your docks.
Yeah, and even just on the equipment side as well, just plan for it, right? We preach a lot about going light braid, so I use 10-pound braid pretty much for all my inshore fishing, and even with docks in many cases. But if I'm specifically going to be targeting docks and I'm actually going for like redfish and snook, I'll bump it up to like 15-pound braid or maybe 20-pound braid. Where dock fishing, you don't need the distance, like you don't need casting distance like you do when you're out in the more open water. You really just need power. Like you have to get those fish out of there, just to prevent break-offs. It's just terrible first of all, it's terrible to lose a fish. And then secondly, we're losing lures into the environment. It's never good as well. So definitely plan the tackle accordingly.
I'm trying to find the captain's name, and I can't, but he did that great video with us in North Carolina when we did a couple of those little videos of one fish, two fish, and that captain in North Carolina. Do you guys recall his name? Looks like Luke might be freezing up on us. But anyhow, if you look for it, I want to give him credit, but he's really big into fishing for redfish. Did you find it, Tony?
No, there were like 3 or 4 names in there. I think it was John Ward. Was that it?
No, it's on YouTube. It's a public video. We'll put a link to it.
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you what it was. What he looks for, which I thought was brilliant, is one, he looks for the longest dock. Especially if you guys watched our podcast last week, where we made some really big mistakes and it was just a really tough one of those days where it's just a grind. And guess where both redfish were caught? Underneath a dock. And he talks about finding the longest dock, especially where I was going with this. Last week was super low tide. Those longest docks are going to have the best advantage, especially during the crazy winters when you might have those really negative tides. So look for the longest dock. Number 2, look for the oldest dock. Makes sense, right? Those old docks, man, they have all kinds of junk and probably things that have been dropped in, and obviously just years of accumulation of barnacles and crabs and crustaceans. I mean, it's like a buffet for, he calls it like ringing the dinner bell for some of these older docks. So I thought that was genius. And then the other part is lights. And that would maybe that would maybe like trump an older dock if you had someone who had a new dock but had left those bright green marine lights on all night long. He's like, that's another one, man. It's just literally bringing in bait throughout the entire night, 8-9 hours of bait just being attracted to a dock. And then that next morning, he's like, those are the first docks I hit. Literally as soon as the sun's coming up, I'm hitting all those docks that have had their lights on all night long, because I know the bait's there. I know the predator fish love docks. Put 2 and 2 together, and they're usually going to have a pretty good chance of catching some fish. So I love that. Oldest, longest, and lights. Do you find his name, Tony?
No, not yet.
All right. Well, not the end of the world. Luke, are you unfrozen now from your
Yeah, hopefully. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now. He's back.
Sweet. Yeah, my internet here is getting a little spotty, but I'll add one more thing to it. Is I'll totally agree with all those, but I also like the first or the last dock. So if there's a shoreline that has like no docks for a while, I really like the very first one. And then the opposite's true, right? If there's a long dock line and then the dock stop, the ends, because again, there's a lot of things like a fish. Right, those fish are just going down the shoreline. They're totally exposed to dolphin when they're going down the shorelines, especially if there's no structure along those shorelines. And then as soon as they get those first dock pilings, that's like their first sense of structure. And they don't know if there's another dock, 50 feet away or not.
Oh, so they don't have smartphones and like.
Yeah, they don't have Yeah, they don't have online maps. So yeah, we have a huge advantage over them. So so the first and last are good. And same with the other ones. Look for a bunch of nasty barnacles and stuff all over them is good. But a lot of time, and some people sink stuff under the docks, and so that's the kind of stuff that you basically have to make a cast under there to know. And that's another reason we'll talk about the lures to use. That's a really important reason to use some weedless lures that can get on the bottom, so that you can first of all feel for the structure, and then secondly, so you can not get snagged when you bump up against the stuff underneath those docks.
Let's talk about best docks in terms of where they are. And where I'm going with this is, let's just say you have a line of docks that's really near a pass, right? Like those docks, Luke, Little Gasparilla Island, right where the pass is, versus some that are way up into, creeks, et cetera. When would one row of docks be better or worse?
Well, it's all seasonal, and again, that's the stuff that we share like every week. And it's every season it definitely changes, but even week over week, based on the weather, like every year is a little bit different. So it's important just to know the latest trends. But in general, the docks closest to the passes and inlets are going to be best during the summer periods, and then the docks further inland are most often going to be best during the winter periods, because a lot of these fish, they will shift up inland, especially snook and also redfish, will shift further inland to get in a little bit warmer water, and that's where a lot of bait fish go as well. And so a lot of the summer docks I don't fish during the winter time, and vice versa. A lot of the docks I fish in the winter I don't target in the summer. So it's long story short, it's seasonal, and even weather dependent too. Like if wind is going from one way or the other, then again, based on the season and really the latest trends, I will actually prefer a eastern shoreline or a northern shoreline or a western. It really just there's a lot of factors involved. But again, that's just the importance of having like real time trends to know exactly what to look for.
Oh, where would someone get that?
No, the Insider Club.
Oh, Salt Truck Insider Club. Interesting.
Yeah, because that's really important thing. Because again, every week we give a kind of a top assessment of what to look for based on the upcoming weather and the most recent trends. So all members, in 10 minutes or less, will get just a quick. It's almost like a cliff notes for your next game plan on what to do. And in those, we specify exactly what sides and what types of areas to look for, because again, like fish move, right? Fish are always moving. And the biggest mistake that I made for many years is I just got fixated on a certain line of docks, and I'll go back there over and over and over again. And now I just look for the right type of dock and the right type of area based on the conditions, and my game plan has totally improved.
Yeah, it's essentially the cliff notes of where you should go fish every single weekend in 10 minutes or less. Pretty stinking awesome. Tony, what do you got there, dude? I know you fish mostly out of a kayak, so you're not fishing docks maybe as often as Luke, just because of that.
Yeah.
But, what do you got in terms of ones that you have found that have worked when you needed to fish them?
Well, if I'm targeting docks, I try to target the ones that are out of the wind, out of the current, or at least not in the brunt force of the wind or the current, just because the wind and the current, when you're fishing from a kayak, that just makes things a lot tougher, especially when fishing a dock. If you hook into a fish, then you're working against the wind and the current and the fish. So
that's how you built up all those muscles, dude. It's a lot of paddling.
I have to go to the gym to work out in order to fish the docks. But I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I just wanted to give an example of like a type of dock that I would target if I was fishing from my kayak. So I have this one pulled up here.
Tony has started screen sharing.
See the screen?
I do. Ooh, nice house there. Ooh.
Yep. If you're watching this and this is your house, I apologize, but
no, hey, this is your chance. If you own this house, all you have to do is contact us. We'll give you free insider membership, and we'll come film at your place. We might even bring some maybe some bluegills, maybe some bush light there, and really class that place up. Look at that! Look at the size of that lot. Man, if you guys are listening to the podcast, this is a pretty nice house.
You might get yelled at fishing this dock, but who knows? But
They probably
if
have
you're,
those pesky sprinklers on the end of it. Those automated sprinklers.
oh yeah, I'm sure they have a hose at the end of the dock too. But if you're listening, the way this dock is set up, it's basically right behind a point. So when the current's coming down, in this case, it would be an outgoing tide, and the current would be coming down past that point, and the dock is tucked behind that point. So when the current's coming down, it's actually getting broken up by that point. So that dock is not in the brunt force of the current. It's almost where the eddy would be. The eddy is the calm spot behind a point where the current's ripping around. So that would definitely help out if you're fishing from a kayak or a paddleboard. And make sure you have an anchor system too. Get an anchor pin or even just a dumbbell or something you can drop into the water on a piece of rope. That way you can anchor up, start fishing that dock. That way if you do hook into something, you can keep from getting pulled into that dock. And also, again, if you have a reverse system on your pedal drive, definitely a plus. But that would be a good example of a type of dock I would be looking for. Something out of the wind, out of the current, right behind a point, just like that. Also a dock that would be inside of a cove would be a little bit more wind protected, and also that dock would not have as much current as opposed to one that would be on like the main river or in a canal or something like that.
And it looks like they've got, if you really zoom in on that house, it almost looked like they had some rocks for like a seawall there on the one side. Yeah. This is
that could actually be a pretty good wintertime spot right there.
Well, you insiders might be you might be watching Tony fish the spot really soon.
multiple things going on there, so it's definitely something else you want to look for when you're fishing a dock, as opposed to just the dock itself. See what's around it. Is it at the mouth of a creek? Is it next to an oyster bar? Are there depth changes or anything like that nearby? Because that will definitely draw in the bait and also draw in the fish as well.
Let's talk real quick about positioning and an approach in a kayak, and then Luke, I know you've got an example too to pull up on the map. Talk about that, Tony, because I think that's something that a lot of people take for granted, but you could just as easily blow out that spot by coming in too fast. You know, how close are you to the dock when you're fishing out of a kayak? Clearly, you know, the further away you can be without spooking the fish, but how would you approach that area?
Yeah, a lot of different factors are going to come into play. If the water's very clear, you want to be as far away as possible, because the fish they can obviously see you much better, as opposed to murky water or dirty water. Then you can almost be right on top of the dock and be able to skip underneath. But as far as positioning goes, if I'm fishing in the current, I'll go ahead and use another dock here as an example, something that would be outside on the main river. Let's see, this one right here. Kind of crummy image, but you can sort of get the gist. But if I was fishing this dock, let's say the current was, well, I guess it really doesn't matter which way the current's going, but if the current's coming at me, that's the position I want to be facing if I'm throwing artificial lures. So if I'm throwing artificials, I want to be facing into the current. And this is where it can be really ideal to have an anchor trolley on your kayak or your paddleboard, just because that allows you to move the anchor up to the bow of the kayak. That way you're facing into the current. You can cast up into the current and then retrieve your lure back to you with the flow of the current. And you also want to be able to skip those lures underneath the dock. That's a big mistake I see a lot of people make when fishing docks, is that they just cast to the outside of the pilings or the outside of the dock and then move on. They don't thoroughly fish the dock. You want to cast up underneath, even if it's just 2 feet over. You might have missed that fish because they might not want to chase after that bait. They may want it right on top of their nose. So make sure you're skipping underneath, in between pretty much each piling, and then bring that lure back to you with the flow of the current. Now, if the current is just too strong and I can't control my lures that well, I'll actually do the opposite. I'll fish on the side, basically facing down in the direction that the current's going, and cast my lures up to the dock and let the current drift my lures into the dock, and then slowly start bouncing them around and see if I can get a strike that way. But again, most of the time when I am fishing a dock from a kayak, I'm anchored up. or I'm using the pedals. I do have the Hobie. So I'm using the pedals to kind of control myself to stay in place and also to move away from the dock if need be. But that can be something really tough when fishing docks with a kayak, is that you do have to anchor up most of the time, especially in current, and it could just take a long time to fish a string of docks that way.
Oh, you mentioned lures. What's kind of your go-to if you're fishing a dock, and do you go weedless or not?
Usually I go weedless, like a gulp jerk shad on the 3/0 owner twist lock hook, 1/16 ounce. That seems to skip really well. Skipping docks is going to be very important. Just like skipping mangroves, you want to get that lure into the strike zone, and also you don't want it to get hung up. Most of the time when you do skip a lure and it is weedless, sometimes the hook will actually pop out, so you just have to be aware of that. And also a gulp shrimp on a jig head works really well when fishing docks.
Go back to that house. I think they might own the entire strip. No, the other one, the dock that you were just what a puny dock for. Look at that. Like, see, they got the tennis courts behind it. Keep going.
Big place.
Yeah, that's like their guest home right there, and little putting green. Holy smokes. That's unreal.
Doing pretty well. See what
Yeah,
kind
I'd
of boat
say
they
have. They got like a little dinghy. Oh, that's did you see the other pilings? Like, that's probably where they keep their 100-footer.
Oh yeah, right there.
Yeah, their 90-foot Cabo or Bayless boat work. Dang. That's awesome, man. Anything else on this spot here before we pivot over to a little story that Luke had?
Not in particular. I guess another thing you can be aware of when you're looking for a dock to fish is when you're looking on the maps, again, see what's around it. Even if you see a little bit of a color change on the bottom from a satellite image, that can be something worth checking out. And that can really distinguish which dock would be more productive in a string of docks. If you find that one that has, the multiple different things going on, color change on the bottom, depth changes, maybe a small oyster bar or something like that. Even just a little tree limb that may be in the water can make that dock more productive than the one next to it.
Cool. Good stuff. All right, Lukey, what you got, dude?
Yeah, I mean, as far as positioning, I'll share some footage for those watching, and I'll just explain it for those listening. And this is, like I totally agree with Tony. It's best, use the current to your advantage as often as possible. So I try, ideally, right, especially if you're going for bigger fish, you want to be down current of the dock so that when you hook it, the current is working in your favor to get the fish out. Plus, with artificial lures, it's essential to be down current because you need to be retrieving your lure with the current. So that's just coming from natural presentation. And the stronger the current is, the more important that is, and vice versa, right? The lower the current is, the least important that is, because it just becomes like a non-factor. So in general, I'll position myself either down current from the dock, or in this case, in this video, we were directly out, directly offshore. So we were directly, straight away from the shoreline. So we're cross current, if you will, and casting in, because that way you can get some good accurate casts, and then you're not fighting the current. And a lot of times, especially in either the super hot or the super cold, those fish are going to be on the deeper sections of the dock. And so that's when I like to fish from the outside in. So here's an example. This is Joe and I fishing. And so Joe right here hooked up to a snook, and you can see it just jumped. It got around this piling. He lost the battle.
Oh, of course you're going to bring that up. Huh?
Yeah. And because this is really important, and it's impossible to be 100%, right? Like some fish are going to win, especially against snook are really good about getting back into the structure and around pilings. But the key to minimize the amount that you lose is, first of all, to get the fish out as fast as you can. But as soon as you feel your line hit the piling, then do the opposite of what your instincts tell you to do, right? Like for years, I would pull harder, like trying to rip it out. And that's the worst thing you could possibly do, because that basically will just make more pressure on the line against the barnacles of the dock, and it's game over every time. And what you need to do is actually lighten up. So I actually will totally lighten up. I will try to, the goal should be to try to make it so that you just have the least amount of sawing impact of the line against the piling. And it's surprising. If you just literally just hold the fish there, this works extremely good for redfish. I have multiple videos showing this, is it gets around the piling and I just hold the line steady, right? I keep the rod just barely bent. And then eventually that fish will fight, and it'll eventually turn the other way. And in many cases, it'll come out. And this video is actually an example of that happening. It'll come out, and then as soon as it's out, then you can pull it away. That's an important reason for using braid, because you can just feel everything. So if you have a good sensitive rod and using braided line, you can feel exactly when the line starts getting on the dock, and that's when you need to lighten up on it. And then you can feel exactly when the rubbing stops, and that's when you can start putting pressure back on. So
I think our instincts, we just imagine that fish is like, it knows what we know and it's laughing at us, and it's like purposely wrapping around, like whatever that game Napoleon Dynamite was, doing, where they hit the tether ball. And the reality is, to your point, what really happens is as soon as they don't feel that hard pressure, they kind of relax and go right back to where they were. They're not sitting there doing circles around the pilings.
Yeah, but you also you need a little bit. You can't give them slack, because then they could potentially wrap around. So if you just keep it steady, just don't let them take more line out unless they're ripping drag, and then you just have to. But in general, mostly the line will start wrapping around, and then as it wraps around, that's just more surface area for the line to absorb the tension. So that's less tension per square inch of line, if you will. So it basically decreases the odds that the line's going to break. And then eventually, if that fish goes all the way around, it'll eventually lose line. It'll be like pinned against the piling. That's not comfortable for them. So they're going to turn around and eventually, in many cases, come out. It's really surprising how often it works. Granted, it won't work every time, but the best way to lose a fish on a break off is to pull harder when you feel that dock, because that's just going to saw the line, and it's game over immediately.
Yeah, one in 10 snook love tetherball. It's been proven over and over. They will wrap you.
And redfish are the easy. I feel like my odds are best with redfish. I've had a lot of redfish saved from doing that. Snook are a little bit tougher, because they'll start jumping, and then like sometimes they get like wrapped around, and then they jump over the line, and then it's just game over. But so anyhow, so this dock in particular, right? This is another reason why it's very important to prevent yourself from being pulled into the dock, because in many cases, again, especially in the wintertime, there'll be, again, there's 15 docks, 20 docks in a row. There's going to be like one or two that's good, right? And there's generally going to be a lot of fish under those one or two docks, because this season they're not spread around like they are in like the spring and fall. So when you find a good dock, it's really important to not spook the fish. And then the best way to spook fish is to be around top of the dock, or to get pulled into the dock if you're not mindful of that. And so in this case, Joe hooked up with that snook's thrashing around, ended up breaking off, and I just kept a distance. This was actually a little bit too close, but it still worked. So Joe just broke off. I made my next cast right there, and then I believe I caught a redfish. Yeah, so I just hooked up, caught a redfish, pulled that puppy out. See if that show that guy. And then as soon as I was fighting the fish, right? If you look at the footage, right? I'd had the trolling motor. As soon as I hooked up, I pulled the trolling motor. I went away from the dock as fast as I could. And that way, again, I pulled the fish out. I pulled us away. We released the fish, and then we slowly went back to this very same dock from the same exact position, right? We know those fish were there. We had 2 casts, had 2 hookups, and then we got in there. So I got another little cast, and it's just a little skip cast. Dock fishing, very important, as Tony said, to get good and comfortable with skip casting, because that way you can get down there right close to those pilings, and they were hooked up again. And this is where the redfish had me against the piling, and then finally came out and caught that puppy, a little bit bigger red. And then we just had, I guess that goes into another footage, but we had a couple more shots there. And so long story short, very, very important is to position yourself either down current or cross current, right, or on the outside, and cast in as far as you're comfortable, just knowing that the further you cast in, when you get a hook up, the more difficult it'll be to pull them out. So I start with the outside pilings, hoping to get them in, and then if I'm not having luck there, then I'll start doing some longer skip cast to get to the further reaches, knowing that my percentage of getting them out is going to decrease. But sometimes you just have to do that.
So before we go into this one, let's talk about the top mistakes that you think most weekend warriors make. We kind of hit on one, which is, when you do get a great strike, and it's basically to have your drag way too loose and let them run all over you, and all of a sudden you have no chance. And then when they do that, is to have that knee-jerk reaction and try to rip them out and end up breaking your line. Tony, mentioned, especially if it's not windy and it's super clear water, about, keeping your distance, trying not to be too close. What are some other big mistakes?
Number one is casting. I mean, dock fishing, it is accurate casts are essential. And if you're not comfortable doing an accurate cast from different angles, because the number one mistake is just not comfortable casting, and then also overhand casting. You do not want to do the only time to do an overhand cast is when you're casting the corners, right? Where you're not having to go under the dock, you're going to the side of the dock. That's when you want to do an overhand to get like the perfect line where you like line up exactly where you want it, and you're guaranteed to not get hooked on the dock. But all other else, right? When you're fishing the pilings, it's a side cast. You have to get very comfortable on side casts, and in particular, I recommend getting comfortable from the left and the right. So that you can position yourself based on the current, and then just be comfortable casting from either side based on just the angle of your boat to the dock. So casting by far number one.
I was going to mention too, when it comes to casting, your rod length can definitely be a factor. If you're fishing from a boat, you're obviously higher up, so you can get away with a 7'6" rod or a 7-foot rod. But because you're casting low to the surface or sidearm casting, if you're fishing from like a kayak or something that's very low to the water, or maybe you're sitting down while you're casting, you might want to go with a shorter rod, such as a 6'6" or a 7-foot. It'll just make it a lot easier to skip cast.
Yeah, that's very true. And second to casting is lure selection, and it's a game changer on doing weedless. And Tony mentioned it before. So if you're fishing, but also especially in the wintertime, I'll just keep talking winter since that's where we are now. The fish are going to be more lethargic. They're almost always going to be on the bottom. They're not coming up they're not too energetic this time of year. So they're not coming up off the bottom to eat. They're going to be down the bottom. And so you have to get there right in their face, or else you're not going to catch them. And so I'm now using these just weedless jig heads, right? So that way I can get down to the bottom, but also I have this weed guard to not get stuck in the pilings or and whatever else is down there. So when I switched over to this was a very big difference for dock fishing, especially when fishing docks that I'm not familiar with, because again, you never know what kind of structures down there. People sink like all sorts of stuff. Like for a lot of people put down like washers and dryers and stuff. Even like rocks, like old cement piling. You never know what's going to be down there. Even crab traps, right? And it's super frustrating to get snagged, because then you're going to break off and just have to retie. It's just a huge pain. It's much more effective to use a weedless jig head. So I've been using these for a while now, and I really like them. I have found that I am missing some strikes, so I do not use these when I'm fishing open water. But when I am fishing docks, very, very important. And to emphasize how important it is to get deep, is I go the extra level where I love paddle tails. This is one of our Slam Shady paddle tails that I absolutely love. But the problem with paddle tails is that just that paddle is extra drag on the water. So I was fishing right after a cold front, and I just realized I just wasn't getting strikes, and I knew fish were there. I was fishing docks that I've been to before, and I knew fish were there. And so I was just thinking that, okay, maybe I knew they're going to be on the backs, on the deep side of the docks. And the only thing I think of is that my lure just wasn't getting down close enough to the bottom fast enough. And so I literally just tore off the paddle tail on purpose so that the lure would drop much faster. And that's what worked. That's what I caught. I've actually caught all my redfish this week on this exact lure, because again, it's getting down deep, and I'm just basically hopping it on the bottom really slow, keeping it right in their face, and they're eating it. So
please do. I have to say this. Make sure to check your state rules and regulations. In quite a few states, it is a misdemeanor to deface or break off the tail of a slam shady paddle tail in particular. We've got to be very protective of these lures. There are not that many made. They're really exclusive. Be very, very careful with your slam shady lures.
And so if it is against the law in your state to tear off a paddle tail, then you can switch over to something else like gold. Basically, I've all been using are the paddle tails, which I like because they're just very versatile, or gulp shrimp, which I like because they dive right. They don't have any sort of resistance in the water. They go straight down. They have good scent, and they work great. The problem with the gulp shrimp is that they're just so expensive. They're like, over $1 a piece, and like one little pinfish can ruin the thing. That they're making them too soft now. But those are two great options. So like dock fishing in the wintertime, like this jig head and then slam shady or a 3-inch gulp shrimp is like, that's all I use. And I think the problem that a lot of people make is they use a lot of lures with like treble hooks, like hard plastic baits. And yes, they will catch fish, but it's way more expensive when you break off. It's more likely to get snagged because they're not weedless, and they just don't dive deep enough for those days where the bite's really tough. So the depth, long story short, depth control is very important, and as well as being weedless, as Tony mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's good.
So another mistake too, and this actually leads into this video that's being shown, is when fishing docks, most of the action can be on the pilings, but not all, right? So it's another mistake I see on people that I take out is that they're not, like, they're going from dock to dock to dock, like not fishing in between. And there's a lot of fish to be caught in between the docks as well. So in this case, I actually just missed a strike under this dock that I was close to. I got a little bit too close to it, made a cast up in the shallows. And then as I was looking up to the next dock, I realized that there was this hole. There was a pothole right next to this piling. So I made a cast to it. I was using this jig head. In this case, I had the weedless shrimp on, the gulp shrimp on this exact jig head. And I made a cast like right there over the pothole, was taking it super slow. You can see I'm just taking my time. And it's crazy how often this happens. I'm just retrieving the lure. I've been down to adjust the trolling motor. And that's when like most of the bites have been happening lately. Again, that's because it's wintertime and these fish are lethargic. That bait just literally just hit the bottom and stayed. And that's when it picked it up.
On the drop.
Ended up being, I guess I don't have the ending footage, but it was an overslot red. It was a legit red. And that was my first day. That was totally exploring new areas. I just moved to St. Pete, and that was my first time, my first day out, and just again exploring new areas, fishing docks with the weedless jig head, and I caught a slam, and even with Crazy Otis on the boat. So this doesn't have to be super complex, right? Just get a good lure that you trust, and then just start getting out there and getting the lure in front of as many fish as possible.
Love it. Yeah. And back to the, getting hung up, when you do, any recommendations for that? I mean, when there's two of us, we've had it before where you mentioned let's just say you have 10 docks, usually one or two are going to be good. Right. And it goes back to that 90-10 rule, right? Even with the docks. And we've had a dock where we already caught a fish, already had another strike. Like, we know it's one of those hot docks. And like, I would get hung up, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, of course. And you would actually say, hey, Joe, just lift your rod up. I'm going to keep making a few more casts because we know there's more fish in there. Let's talk about that, especially if you're fishing with two people, or even, you and a buddy kayaking together. And because once you go, obviously, approach the dock and try to retrieve your lure, you've pretty much shut down that dock.
Correct. Yeah. No. And again, getting stuck, if you don't get snagged at least every once in a while, you're not casting close enough and you're not getting to the bottom. Because even with these jig heads, nothing's like, especially like oysters, like these will still get.
Or people sink Christmas trees underneath their docks. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Down the street.
Well, these will go over Christmas trees, no problem. But it's that hard structure, just like one little oyster ledge. This this little tiny lip will get stuck there. And so you're going to get snagged every once in a while. if it's the first cast, like if fishing more than one person, if it's the first cast in a dock and I've never been there before and I have no idea if it's good or not, then it's okay. Whoever got snagged just has to wait. Just try to keep the line out of the other person's way. Let that person get a couple casts in there. And if they catch one, then you got to wait longer, right? But if you don't catch anything, then just go up to the dock. In most cases, especially if you're using weedless, the hook point is not going to be on the structure. All you have to do is just get some tension to go in the opposite direction. So I basically just go up to the dock. In many cases, up underneath the dock. So I'll just put my rod, get it, I try to get vertical or get past vertical, and then just give it a little bump, and it'll usually pop right out. So again, the importance of going weedless is that when you do get snagged, it's often just like caught around some sort of hard structure. In many cases, you can do like that slingshot kind of a technique where you put tension on the line and then let it go, and it kind of like pops the lure off. So try that. But if that doesn't work, then you can just get your rod tip up either vertical above the snag lure, or past vertical, and it'll almost always come out without having to jump in the water or get wet or do whatever. So that'll save a lot of lures.
Love it. Cool, man.
But just know when you do that, so when you go up to the dock, it's toast. Like those fish, if they were there, they're either gone or they're spooked and they won't be eaten for a while. But that is a good time to keep if you're fishing areas with clear water, and especially exploring new areas. That's the time to really be looking and just look for fish, right? If you see fish there, it's probably going to be a good dock for the next trip. And so even when there is a snag, it's not a total disaster, because you can at least look and know if it's going to be a dock to spend more time on next trip, or if it's just a total bust.
Good stuff. And I think it was last week's trip when we were fishing that new area in St. Pete. And remember, it was like, we're like 40 minutes in, and just like, it was so brutal. And like, we looked at we had a line of docks coming up, and it was, a long one, super short one, like complete stub. And then a really long one. We're like, oh man, that third one's going to be money. And I was like so frustrated, because, we're filming, and it's always frustrating when you're filming and you want to catch fish in general, but when you're filming and it's been going that long, you don't. And lo and behold, that little stub ended up, having a really nice redfish underneath it. So another reason, even though we said in general, the longest and oldest and the lights are best, don't skip any dock, because you just never know. And it did kind of go into like a little cut. It might've just had a deep hole down there, but that thing had a really nice red underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, those fish, fish move, right? So they're not always going to be into those docks. A lot of times they'll be moved from one to the other. They're just moving down the line. And so, yeah, it's just to that point. That's why it's very important to fish in between the docks. And I get at least one cast every dock, even if it looks terrible. If there's like brand new pilings, sometimes that still works. But if just going by statistics, the ones we mentioned earlier, the longest, the first, the ones with the gnarliest amount of structure on the pilings, those are typically going to be the best. But you always everything else is worth a try. Lately, actually, a lot of my best fish have been in between the docks, surprisingly, and that's the best, right? That's ideal if you get them in between the docks, because that way the odds of actually landing the fish, especially the bigger ones, are way higher.
Love it. All right, so we covered the where, like what kind of docks to look for. We covered the what to use, how to use it, meaning, what lures and how to retrieve it. Let's talk about the when, in terms of tides. We kind of talked about the time of year, but does it matter to you guys, incoming, outgoing? Obviously, Tony, if you're in the lagoon, a little bit different there. What do you guys, what are the thoughts on tides and moon phases for docks?
I feel like as long as water's moving, not so much incoming or outgoing, but as long as you have water movement around the dock, I think that's definitely a plus. And same thing if you're fishing in an area that doesn't have tidal flow, such as Mosquito Lagoon or Banana River, Indian River. If you have some wind pushing water through those docks, that can definitely be a plus.
I totally agree. And yeah, I mean, it's all season long. Current is nice, and the warmer it is, the more important that is. And then sometimes the only time, like there are some situations where I actually purposely target some of the lower current spots, Still, the high current periods are always the best. That's just when like the most life is happening, moving around, and feeding happens. But sometimes after the coldest cold fronts, I purposely target like coves where there's no water movement, just knowing that it's more likely to be a little bit warmer than everywhere else because that cold water that's circulating isn't hitting there. And so there are some, long story short, there are some situations to, I guess, don't always overlook the non-current zones, but yeah, in general, the more current, the current periods are the best. Like slack current period is almost always going to be the worst bite. But with dock fishing, particularly in the wintertime, that's when I'm not quite as concerned about the slack period. I'll just fish whenever I can fish, because those fish they're going to be holding down there. They're not really looking to eat, but if they have an easy meal right in their face, a lot of times they'll take a swipe at it. That's just the importance of getting down deep right in their face, because they literally will bite even when it's like the middle of the day and like slack tide. You can still get some action.
Yeah, that one video you showed of us, I mean, I remember that was like a brutal hot day, middle of the day.
Yep.
Golly, that was a tough one.
In that area,
still killed it.
Yeah, that area, that was the Indian River, and there's really no current, so that was just literally fishing the outside of the dock, and we had to revive those fish for a really long time. It was just so hot, there was very little oxygen in the water, and so we were just taking it super slow, and that's what they react. So it was terrible conditions to actually fish, but we adjusted our strategy based on the conditions, and we had a really good day. So that's really the key, is just adjusting what you're doing to the actual conditions that you're facing, instead of just to what happened like last time or last month or two. Because I think that was our biggest mistake for years, is we would just have a good day and get so pumped and then just try to recreate it over and over again, regardless of the conditions, like the weather. And we just never were consistent because of that.
Well, and if you need help with that and you like these kind of videos and you want more, definitely join the Insider Club. We just broke through 12,000 members. So awesome how many people are joining and sticking. We were looking at our numbers at how many people have been around for now 3+ years. Pretty stinking awesome. So join that. If you want to know more, you can go to saltstrong.com or saltstrong.com/pricing. See everything that you get right there. In basically a sentence, we're literally going to show you where to fish every week. If you live anywhere from Texas all around the Gulf up to Virginia, New Jersey, show you where to fish every week, 10 minutes or less. You get all of our exclusive tips, help from all the fishing coaches, and then the discounts too. If you guys can see behind me, if you're watching, I mean, all these rods, reels, a big chunk of these were all purchased and saved a ton of money using our discounts, because now that we have 12,000 people, it's a lot of leverage talking to some of these manufacturers and big tackle distributors who are willing to essentially sponsor you, the angler, and anywhere from 10 to even 40-50% off on some items and some brands. It's been big.
Yeah, and those products, yeah, because we're very unique in the fact that we don't accept sponsorship dollars from these companies, because we want our loyalty to be 100% to you, to the members. And so when companies reach out to us, yes, we will not accept your stuff, but will you sponsor the Insider Club members? And we get yeses more often than not. So that actual the discount program is growing really fast, and now we're actually starting to reach out to these companies proactively. And like this year is our big move to get a lot more product. We already have a pretty good amount, and we're about to have a ton. So that will more than pay for the actual membership dues for most anglers, especially the ones the more advanced, who are actually fishing a lot. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew about that. That has been really exciting to see how fast that part of the club is growing.
Yep, and you get to spend more time with us every week. Pretty doggone fun, interactive community. I'm loving it. Oh, look at this, guys! What a surprise! My kids just came home from school. You guys say hi to the Podcast Nation. That's Savannah. Were you at dance class? Dang. And little Action Jackson, you say hi, buddy? Hi. Yeah, there he is. All right. You guys made your appearance. Perfect timing. We're just about to close it up. Well,
Daddy, I need you to come with me.
All right. I'll be down there in 2 seconds.
You come with me.
You guys, oh, adorable.
Oh, there's poop on my window.
There's poop on your window. This is crazy.
Poop on my window.
You never know what's going to happen on these podcasts.
Yeah, you really don't. So we'll close it at that. This episode sponsored by the Insider Club and Joyce's Dock. If you want to go get sprayed by an old lady on the dock, go to Joyce's Dock. All right, buddy, 1 second. And then finally, please, 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 obviously join the Insider Club, no brainer, risk-free for a year. And then finally on the podcast, if you love it, you want more of these types, or if you like the live stuff while we're out on the boat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. The best way to do it is to just go to iTunes and leave a review. It would help us out tremendously. Leave a review, subscribe. It helps us get found out there. It helps us continue to say no to sponsors because we get a lot of people asking us to sponsor the podcast and all of our stuff. We continue to say no because we have amazing people like you in the Insider Club. Jackson, all right, we say goodbye. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Say join the club.
Join the club.
Say see you real soon.
See you soon.
Say bye, Uncle Puke.
Bye-bye.
Don't say that one, Jackson. Don't say that
Say
one.
bye, Tony Baloney. You see Tony Baloney? All right, guys. Good times. Let's go fish some docks.
Oh, yeah.
We out. Peace.
See
There's something about the water that'll give you peace, all by yourself or with your family. Live salt strong and wear the line today.